Aware of the ongoing feud, investigators immediately suspect the Hells Angels in the murder of pagan President Francisco Rosado. Problem being, they don't know which Hells Angels.
I still remember the phone call. The dispatcher's voice was clipped, almost hesitant but heavy with urgency. "Looks like there's going to be trouble out there," he said. I was one of the officers dispatched, though at the time, I had no idea what kind of storm we were about to step into. The desert in Arizona doesn't give much away. You can walk across 1,000 miles of sand and scrub and never see another soul, and yet the ground remembers everything. When the screaming stops, when the dust settles, it's not peace that lingers, it's silence. And that silence is dangerous, fertile with threats that grow unseen. The Arizona desert has always been more than a barren wasteland. It is a corridor where law is thin and fleeting, a no-man's land stretching from the jagged border fence near Lukeville through remote valleys to the northern reaches near Colorado. For decades, it has been haunted by the ghosts of outlaws, gun runners, and traffickers who slipped across the border under the cover of darkness. Trails carved into the sand, abandoned vehicles, and dried riverbeds serve as markers of its violent past. And yet, the quiet has a way of lulling even the most vigilant into underestimating what waits. In recent years, that quiet has fractured. The sound of Harley engines has begun to punctuate the stillness, rolling across the dunes with a power that is impossible to ignore. From the north came the Hells Angels, the world's most notorious outlaw motorcycle club, feared not just for their reputation, but for the discipline and code that governs every member. From the south came the Sinaloa Cartel, armed, organized, and merciless, a criminal empire that had long tested the limits of the United States southern border. And somewhere between those two forces, a collision was inevitable. March 17, 2024 became the date when decades of tension, territorial encroachment, and personal vendettas finally erupted. The Hells Angels, veterans of battles both on American soil and within their own violent subculture, confronted an army. Not rival bikers, not local militias, but cartel enforcers carrying military-grade weapons, backed by decades of organized crime experience. And in the desert, over 300 lives would be extinguished, leaving only smoke, scorched sand, and a silence so profound it became legendary. Before we can understand how it came to this, we need to go back, not just to the desert, but to a night in 1974 that forged the Angels' approach to violence, strategy, and vengeance. A night that taught them that survival requires more than firepower. It requires discipline, preparation, and an unwavering code. The desert would become the latest chapter in a story that began half a century ago. To understand the Arizona Desert Showdown, you must first understand who the Hells Angels are and how they fight. Their tactics are born of history, and one night in Cleveland, Ohio, in 1974, became the blueprint for every calculated confrontation that followed. The Polish Women's Hall, a modest brick building in a tightly knit Polish neighborhood, was meant for community events, weddings, gatherings, small celebrations. But on that night, it became the site of one of the deadliest biker brawls in American history. It began as a bike show, a display of custom motorcycles, gleaming chrome, and engineered horsepower. 32 Angels arrived, a disciplined unit, armed and prepared. Opposite them were rival bikers, 8 times their number, all seeking dominance and blood. What unfolded inside that hall was not chaos. It was orchestrated carnage. Every move, every angle of attack, and every defensive maneuver reflected a level of tactical awareness rarely seen outside military operations. The Angels' survival wasn't luck. It was preparation, understanding of terrain, and cold, calculated violence. 32 outnumbered, yet they walked away. Their opponents were decimated. Investigators later described the massacre as a military-style operation with pre-positioned weapons, communication signals, and synchronized strikes. The floors were soaked in blood, the walls still echoing the chaos. Survivors recounted the precision of the assault, noting that the Angels seemed to anticipate every move, every strike. That night was a baptism of strategy, a lesson in survival under impossible odds. It was also a lesson in reputation. The Angels were not just a gang. They were warriors with a code, capable of executing operations that rivaled trained paramilitary forces. This incident became a touchstone for the Brotherhood. The Polish Hall massacre was remembered not only for the sheer brutality, but for the method behind it. Pre-positioning, tactical flanking, controlled chaos. These principles would guide the Angels for decades. Veterans who participated carried the lessons forward, passing them to younger generations, embedding a mindset that valued discipline as much as loyalty. Fast forward nearly 50 years, and the echoes of that night are visible in the sands of Arizona. The Angels' approach to confrontation had evolved but remained rooted in the same principles: pre-positioning weapons, understanding the environment, anticipating the enemy. The hallways of Cleveland had been replaced by desert trails and dry riverbeds, but the strategy endured. It wasn't just about surviving a fight, it was about controlling it, dominating it, leaving no doubt who held power. The battle in Cleveland set the standard. It was the origin of a mindset that would allow a small, disciplined group to face overwhelming odds and emerge victorious. And in the Arizona desert, the same principles were about to be tested on a scale far larger, against an enemy far deadlier: the Sinaloa Cartel. The Arizona desert is deceptive. From the map, it looks empty, a sun-baked stretch of sand and scrub with nothing to see but cacti and distant ridgelines. But on the ground, it is anything but empty. It is a labyrinth of dry washes, hidden valleys, and narrow corridors that have long served as secret highways for smugglers, gun runners, and anyone willing to risk the crossing. Among these stretches, one corridor has earned a reputation for being particularly treacherous: the Sonoran Gate, spanning from Lukeville on the southwestern tip to San Luis Rio, Colorado. For decades, it was the silent artery through which narcotics, weapons, and migrants alike flowed north, evading the eyes of federal enforcement. In the early 2020s, that quiet corridor began to hum with activity that no one could ignore. The Sinaloa Cartel, one of the world's most sophisticated and ruthless criminal organizations, consolidated control over the Sonoran Gate. Their methods were not the improvisational violence of street gangs. They were deliberate, organized, and equipped with tools usually reserved for combat zones. Convoys of trucks carrying weapons, narcotics, and armed operatives became a common sight to anyone monitoring the border, though most observers underestimated the scope. Night vision drones, belt-fed machine guns, and reconnaissance vehicles allowed the cartel to move with precision, using the desert itself as a shield. At the same time, the Hells Angels began to reassert themselves along these same routes. Initially, law enforcement dismissed reports of motorcycle patrols through private ranch lands near Ajo, Arizona, as local militias or hobbyists. But the patterns were unmistakable. Tire tracks, burned-out vehicles, and intercepted radio chatter suggested something far more organized. The Angels weren't random wanderers. They were disciplined, using the same call signs associated with the Nomads chapter from California, a chapter known for experience in both street violence and tactical operations. Federal sources documented unusual activity: convoys escorted along desert trails, semi-automatic weapons seen in plain view from a distance, signs of pre-positioned supplies, and surveillance of cartel routes. Locals reported seeing groups of black motorcycles moving silently in formation, headlights off, engines controlled to reduce sound. In an area where even law enforcement struggled to maintain a presence, the Angels were carving out a zone of control. The desert, once neutral ground, had become contested territory. On one side, a cartel seeking to expand and dominate. On the other, a biker brotherhood motivated not by profit, but by vengeance. The Sonoran Gate was no longer just a passage. It was a battleground, a proving ground where decades of experience, both criminal and tactical, would collide. In those remote stretches of Arizona, the stakes were life and death, and only one side could emerge in command of the desert trails. For the Hells Angels, the Arizona desert was never just territory, it was personal. Over the past decade, the opioid crisis had taken an unrelenting toll on their ranks and the communities they called home. Brothers overdosed on fentanyl-laced narcotics, families destroyed, lives ended long before their time. This wasn't a war over turf, money, or recognition. This was war born of vengeance. The enemy wasn't just a faceless cartel, it was the Sinaloa network, the architects of death quietly flooding communities across the United States with poison. The loss cut deep. The Angels' creed, forever forward, had always emphasized loyalty, endurance, and survival, but the toll of fentanyl reshaped it into something darker. Personal loss transformed into collective action. Each overdose, each family torn apart by cartel-distributed narcotics became a motive, a call to arms. To outsiders, it may have seemed reckless, a vigilante impulse, but for the Brotherhood, it was a moral obligation. They were the line between chaos and consequence, and now, the desert was the stage on which they would act. Federal reports and local law enforcement notes from Arizona's western corridor documented the emerging tension. Burned-out vehicles, scattered shell casings, and tire tracks leading north toward known biker gathering spots painted a picture of preparation. Intercepted communications indicated that these weren't random acts. They were coordinated movements. Motorcycle convoys were observed escorting civilian trucks through desert trails in formation, a behavior consistent with tactical convoys. Every action, every route, every move spoke of experience drawn from decades of strategic thinking. The kind of experience honed not just in outlaw confrontations, but in calculated survival. By early 2024, intelligence suggested the Angels had begun establishing caches along the northern approaches to the Sonoran Gate. Weapons, ammunition, and tactical gear were hidden near dry washes, under boulders, in spots known only to those who had lived and ridden these trails for years. Their discipline mirrored military precision. Marines, ex-special forces, and veterans within their ranks translated battlefield training into guerrilla tactics, adapting urban and roadside ambush strategies to the desert landscape. The catalyst was clear. Fentanyl deaths had made the threat personal. What began as a drug-fueled grief had evolved into preparation, intelligence gathering, and territorial control. The desert would become the front line of retribution. The Angels weren't simply responding to cartel activity. They were bringing justice, according to their own code, to those who had stolen lives in silence, leaving the law impotent. And when the two forces finally met, the desert would bear witness to a clash born of loss, vengeance, and decades of lethal experience. What set the Angels apart in the Arizona desert was not just their intent, but their method. By March 2024, intelligence indicated that the Hells Angels had begun positioning themselves with a precision that would rival small military units. Drawing lessons from the Polish Hall massacre, decades of experience in organized violence, and military backgrounds among their members, the Brotherhood transformed the desert into a battlefield of their design. Reports later revealed that weapons caches were buried along key choke points, dry riverbeds, under natural rock formations, and in abandoned ranch outbuildings. These caches contained rifles, ammunition, explosives, and night vision equipment, allowing the Angels to maintain a tactical advantage against any approaching convoy. Each cache was placed to provide maximum cover and line of sight, giving them the ability to strike quickly and disappear into the desert's labyrinthine terrain. Law enforcement officials would later describe it as paramilitary organization at a civilian scale. The Angels' communication network was equally sophisticated, using encrypted shortwave radios, call signs familiar to the Nomads chapter, and prearranged signals. They could coordinate movements across miles of unpatrolled desert without detection. Drones, captured later by surveillance leaks, suggested reconnaissance flights had been conducted to map the convoy's likely routes. Every detail, from elevation changes to tire tracks in soft sand, was accounted for. Unlike most criminal operations, this was intelligence-driven. It was strategy, not chaos, that would determine the outcome. Leadership on the ground was rumored to be under Rex Mendez, a Marine Corps veteran whose career had included special operations. Though once expelled from the Brotherhood for unauthorized actions, he was reinstated under the shared cause of confronting the cartels. Mendez's knowledge of tactics, patrol coordination, and desert warfare gave the Angels an edge. Sources later claimed he treated the desert like a live-fire training ground, teaching younger riders how to move quietly, use cover effectively, and execute flanking maneuvers that would overwhelm even well-armed opposition. The Angels' intelligence gathering extended to observation of the cartel itself. By monitoring radio chatter, satellite imagery, and movement patterns, they identified weaknesses in the convoy formations, points where vehicles would slow, and terrain where escape would be difficult. In essence, the Angels studied the cartel like an opposing army, identifying not just targets, but opportunities for strategic dominance. By the night of March 17, 2024, the Angels were in position. The desert had become a chessboard, and the pieces were in place. Every move, every ambush point, every route of retreat had been rehearsed. They weren't entering a firefight blindly. They were initiating it on their own terms. And in the vast, unforgiving Sonoran desert, that preparation would be the difference between survival and annihilation. The night began like any other in the Arizona desert, black, vast, and deceptively still. At 12:57 a.m., motion-triggered cameras recorded the first sign of movement, a column of 12 trucks, later identified as the Los Niños enforcement wing of the Sinaloa Cartel, creeping north through an unofficial corridor outside Organ Pipe National Monument. Their cargo wasn't just drugs. It was military-grade weaponry, M249S, RPGs, night vision drones, the kind of firepower that could turn a desert into a war zone in minutes. But they were unaware that the Angels were already watching. Days earlier, Hells Angels riders had infiltrated the area, positioning themselves along dunes, washes, and dry riverbeds. Weapons caches were in place, routes were mapped, and communication networks were established. The desert, in all its emptiness, was now a prepared battlefield. At precisely 1:14 a.m., the two forces collided. The Angels emerged from dune trails to the north and west. Semi-automatic rifles ready, improvised explosives in hand. Muzzle flashes illuminated the desert, triggering satellite alerts that were initially mistaken for lightning storms. Automatic fire ripped through the night, a blur of tracer rounds cutting across sand and sky. Those few who survived would later describe the sound as constant, relentless, like Fallujah on a smaller, more brutal scale. The cartel convoy attempted to respond, but the Angels had calculated every move. Vehicles were disabled using grenades, IEDs, and precise rifle fire. The Angels moved in pairs, leapfrogging forward, suppressive fire covering every advance. Tracer rounds cut the darkness as if painting the path of annihilation, a strategy lifted directly from the military tactics of their Marine Corps trained members. Within 43 minutes, over 2 miles of desert had become a graveyard. Trucks burned, smoke columns stretched into the horizon, and over 300 heat signatures vanished into cold silence. By dawn, the Angels had disappeared. The desert revealed the aftermath. Wrecked vehicles, smoldering fires, scorched sand, and bodies scattered in chaotic precision. Federal drones repositioned, only to find that every trace of the Angels had vanished. Thermal imagery confirmed over 300 fatalities, mostly from the cartel, including Victor Elpez Quintero, a mid-level lieutenant responsible for fentanyl logistics. Mexican military units crossed the border to recover bodies, only to find the terrain largely sealed off. The official line from authorities described it as a large-scale inter-cartel dispute, avoiding any mention of the Angels. Yet locals recognized the signs. Black Harley tracks leading north, tire burn marks in dry riverbeds, and the silent coordination of vehicles moving in formation. In biker culture, this was understood instantly. The Angels had delivered retribution, and they had done so without leaving witnesses. Across the border, the Sinaloa Cartel spiraled into chaos. Infighting erupted, safe houses were torched, and rival lieutenants blamed one another. Within days, mid-level commanders such as El Gato, Pajaro, and Morocco were found executed along Sonoran highways, each body marked with a flaming skull surrounded by wings, the Angels' signature. The Hells Angels operate under a strict code. No talk, no witnesses, no surrender. They left no evidence, no bragging, no social media posts outside encrypted forums. Yet patterns emerged. Memorials on deep web forums, encrypted images of flaming skulls and the number 317, and tributes on murals quickly painted over. Silence itself became a weapon, denying the government, the public, and the cartels certainty about who had struck. For the Brotherhood, this wasn't just vengeance. It was justice according to their creed. They did not seek recognition, only to neutralize a threat. The same threat that had claimed the lives of their brothers through overdoses. The desert became sacred ground, a monument to their defiance. Inside U.S. agencies, the response was complex. The FBI opened Operation Red Rain, a classified investigation into domestic paramilitary biker activity. Internal memos acknowledged the Angels' precision, coordination, and military-style tactics, but no arrests were made. Border officials admitted privately that the Angels were keeping the bad guys out, even if unofficially. Publicly, the incident was described as cartel infighting, but behind closed doors, there was quiet acknowledgement. The Angels had achieved what law enforcement could not. Leaked intelligence confirmed that weapons used were stolen from military stockpiles, some linked to Marine surplus shipments. Observers noted that the Angels had likely included former military contractors among their ranks, further increasing their tactical capability. Yet Washington remained silent, tacitly approving the Angels' actions through inaction. Within weeks, the story spread, selectively, quietly, through encrypted biker forums, intelligence leaks, and local whispers. Across Arizona's towns, Lukeville, Ajo, residents reported motorcycles patrolling at night, engines low, headlights off. Trails once used by cartel convoys were abandoned. Outlaw motorcycle clubs elsewhere, like the Bandidos and Mongols, began emulating the Angels' methods, establishing checkpoints and patrols. The Sonoran Purge had transformed into legend. Some viewed it as vigilante justice, others as premeditated murder. To the Angels, it was neither. It was their way of enforcing a moral code in a lawless region, ensuring that the border remained theirs to watch, silently, with precision. By early 2025, the impact was unmistakable. Cartel activity slowed, and the border fell under an unofficial authority. Murals, encrypted memorials, and ritualistic gatherings reinforced the Angels' mythos. Satellite imagery and forensic investigations later revealed burn scars, hidden caches, and traces of high-grade weaponry, confirming the scale of the operation. The desert, once a silent corridor for smugglers and outlaws, had become a witness to calculated retribution, a theater of both vengeance and control. The memory of that night permeated every corner of the Sonoran region. Residents of small towns like Y, Lukeville, and Ajo reported strange phenomena: black motorcycles moving at night, engines subdued, headlights off, gliding silently through desert trails previously dominated by cartel convoys. Hunters stumbled across hidden ammunition caches, partially buried under rocks, while abandoned vehicles riddled with bullet holes seemed to appear like ghostly markers of past clashes. Those who experienced it rarely spoke, but the stories spread in hushed tones, a language of warning and awe. Locals began to notice changes beyond the physical traces. Smugglers found routes blocked, convoys intercepted without explanation, and communication channels disrupted. The mere possibility that the angels were present created a psychological barrier as effective as any patrol or checkpoint. Even cartels operating hundreds of miles south seemed to tread more carefully, aware that a shadow had fallen over Arizona's desert expanses. The angels' presence became ritualized. Each year, veterans and new members alike revisited the desert, performing silent rides, leaving subtle markers, or burning effigies to honor the dead. These acts were not for media attention or propaganda. They were ceremonies of remembrance and warning. Encoded online memorials, skulls with flaming wings and the number 317 became part of the Brotherhood's culture, reinforcing the legend to members who could never witness it firsthand. And yet, the legacy was not limited to mythology. Analysts later noted that the Angels' methods had inspired similar paramilitary behavior in other outlaw motorcycle clubs along the US-Mexico border. Patrols, tactical positioning, and covert intelligence gathering became the blueprint for a new form of fraternal enforcement, transforming outlaw culture into an organized deterrent force. The desert remembered. Drivers still reported black motorcycles trailing convoys. Hunters discovered buried ammunition caches, and when the wind shifted, some swear they could hear the faint echo of Harley engines in the night, a reminder that the border war never truly ended. The US government denied involvement. The cartels tried to rewrite history. But the Angels' legacy remained, carved into sand, steel, and memory. Wars, in the Angels' world, do not end. They wait, patiently, silently, forever forward.